I love making missions in ARMA. More specifically, I love scripting in ARMA. The flexibility you have with SQF is unmatched in any other game I've played. If a function or process exists in the game, there's like a 96% chance you can use it yourself, be it spawning parachutes, taking over damage handlers to calculate the health independently from the game, or just spawning in a nuke. Now, I've played ARMA for a long time, so one of the things that I really like to make the most is a mission that expands upon or changes the dynamics of the base gameplay, like a boss fight or extreme CQB or whatever. So, one day, while I was just looking through YouTube, I stumbled across a game called Boundary. It's an FPS that's set in space, and I thought to myself, well, I wonder if I can do that in ARMA. So, I got to looking around the internet to see if anybody else has actually tried anything like this. And unfortunately, I only found 2 links relevant to what I wanted to do. One being a Reddit thread where most people agreed that it was impossible or that it'd be a super janky implementation of the function set velocity, and the other one was a snippet of code on GitHub from a guy named Bear Mit Umlat, sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, which spawns a vehicle in front of the player, calculates its mass, and adds its mass plus about 9.8 meters per second to achieve weightlessness. So, checking it out, I spawned in a unit with the code snippet and my players in it, and to my surprise, it actually worked. So after that test, I knew that weightlessness was possible, so I set about trying to use it on a player instead. I pretty quickly found out that using the add force to a unit just straight up knocks them out without any force at all. I'm pretty sure this is how the developers made concussion work. So, going off of the comments in that Reddit thread, I tried using set velocity instead, and bam, my character was weightless. So, first things first, I need to figure out how I was going to allow the players to move around in zero-G. Up and down was pretty simple, as I just needed to adjust how much meters per second of velocity they had in the z-axis, but the direction was a bit more complicated. At first, I just slotted in the function weapon direction, which just gets the vector of the player's current held weapon. All I really had to do was throw out the variable for z, as I was handling that through other means, and then multiply the x and the y values by about 0.2 so I didn't just rocket across the map. I ended up switching this implementation out for a different one after a while, but we'll talk about that later. Controlling speed was actually a pretty easy implementation after I had laid down the groundwork of movement. I just popped in a handler that ran on each frame to check if the player had pressed any movement keys, and then added the velocity multiplier if they did. After figuring that out, I also went ahead and swapped the player animation out for an animation used when in the relaxed position while diving to make it look a little bit nicer and make it much easier to aim. I also recolored the player's jumpsuit to white to make it easier to spot them in the dark, and also to match the space aesthetics. So, with the basic setup, I went to do my first test in the map I wanted to use, which was Altus, and about 12 kilometers up in the air, and it broke. As it turns out, ARMA has this super cool feature where if a player is above 100 meters, they'll automatically transfer into the freefall animation and won't stop until they have hit the ground, died, or used a parachute. I tried everything to fix this, including forcing the player to change back to my animation whenever it tried to change its animation, but no dice. So, I ended up using the VR map at night and setting a kill barrier of about 100 meters. In retrospect, I could have probably just dropped the players back down if they hit like 90 meters or something, but fuck them, just don't go above 100 meters. Now that I knew my limitations and the map that I was going to use, it was time to give a much needed overhaul to the movement system to make it feel more realistic and fun. See, up until now, I needed to collect the weapon direction every frame and was just applying it to the player's velocity each frame as well. What this means is that when you looked in a new direction, your momentum would instantaneously be applied to where you were looking. This not only limits you, but it also felt really gamey, so I decided to switch it to a more complex vector addition method. But to explain that, first we need to talk about vectors in ARMA. You should remember from high school that a vector is the distance in a direction. Visualizing it like this in a 360-degree circle makes it fairly easy to understand. However, ARMA doesn't calculate vectors like this at all. ARMA calculates vectors via a grid system. Since the vector is just a line, you can determine the line by taking the x and y position, and then using them with an origin point, the player in this case, to create the 2 legs needed to form a right triangle. So to make things feel more realistic, instead of adding a multiplier to use when calculating the vector and then updating that vector every frame, the multiplier is static, and the new vector is stored in its own variable when the movement key is pressed. The new vector is then added to the unit's current velocity vector using the vector add function. This not only allows for aiming in any direction while moving, but it also allows a little bit more fine control over your direction and a bit more of a realistic feel, as you actually have to look and cancel out your momentum properly. Now, this was the easy part. The hard part was getting strafing to work. Since ARMA doesn't calculate its vectors based on degrees, the easiest way I found to add movement to the right or the left of a unit was by taking the vector of the direction the player was looking, changing it back to a degree measurement, adding either 90 or 280 degrees depending on the direction pressed, and then making sure the new degree measurement was within the 360 degree limit. This all gets passed to a function written by Ruger392 that I found on the Bohemia forums that then takes the degree measurement and sends back a vector of that degree measurement. Then all I have to do is add this vector to my current vector velocity like I did with forward and backwards movement, and bam, strafing now works. Now, this all was a mouthful, but the movement system is the majority of the work that was done for the script for pretty obvious reasons. Next, I implemented a few little things to help with atmosphere and playability. An altimeter to avoid the 100 meter kill barrier. A trigger to denote when to turn on and off zero gravity. This was fluffed in the mission briefing as a ship having a artificial gravity generator. Killing the sound when in zero gravity. A breathing sound effect to let the player know that they are in zero G. And lights for the ship to help the player see them in pitch black. I also created 2 side missions to go along with the main one, a tutorial to explain the movement mechanics, and a TVT for a bit of fun after the session was over. Only thing left after all that was multiplayer integration, which in all honesty wasn't as bad as I expected. Other than a really weird bug I encountered when passing the player's unit to the script, which took a very long time to figure out, everything else synced flawlessly. Shout out to my man Adanta for testing this with me on the server.
Whoa! It works! Look at us! Oh fuck, dude!
I'm slowed up.
Yeah, slow it up, dude. This is sick!
And on session day, everyone got to see the result of my work. What happened to you?
Found a corner. Right in the fucking noggin.
Did you have a fun time in zero gravity?
That's so fucking cool. I'm so impressed. That is like
This
cool as shit.
took me so fucking long to work out all the bugs. Holy ass.
I'm thoroughly impressed.
I
Like,
appreciate
it's sick.
I appreciate it, I really do.
Like, it's like, this shouldn't even be possible.
Yeah, it really shouldn't. As far as the results of all this, I'm actually pretty happy with how it turned out. As far as I know, no one has really tried to do something like this within the confines of ARMA before, and for what I was doing with the physics engine, it had very little jank. As far as what I would do differently, I'd love to figure out how to stop the freefall animation from happening and remove the 100 meter cap, as well as having a bassy low-pass gunshot sound effect for shooting in 0G, instead of no sound at all. But, given my limited time of 2 weeks, I can't beat myself up too hard for these relatively minor things. If you want to run this for yourself, I pasted the code in the description of this video, so go nuts, and thanks for watching. Huge shout out to Bear Mit Umlat for the original code snippet I worked off, Ruger392 for the excellent explanation of vector systems in ARMA, and the admins of my ARMA group, Gunner and Grumpy.